Okay friends, it's time to get started on our job. Something that I want you to think about is we're going to be having to remove the air intake system from right up top here, so you're going to want to make sure that you have the gaskets for that as well. With that said, let's continue on by removing this cover right here. We're going to go ahead and remove these two bolts. Let's grab this, we'll lift it straight up, remove it from the vehicle. Now let's remove the oil dipstick. Go ahead and check that out. We'll wipe it off, set it aside as well. Now the next thing we're going to do is remove this hose right here from the valve cover. Just going to squeeze on this clamp. We'll lift it right on up. Grab onto that hose, give it a little wiggle. Pull that off of there. Whenever you remove a hose, you always want to give it a couple little squeezes. Just make sure it's nice, soft, and pliable, and it's not torn or worn in any way. We'll go ahead and set this one aside. Now we can make our way over to the other side. You're going to find an electrical connector right here. For this, there's a little squeeze tab that's located on the inner side right here. I'm just going to squeeze on that with my index finger, and I'll press this down. Whenever you remove an electrical connector, inspect it. If you see any funny colors, it's corrosion and it needs to be dealt with. That looks fine, so we can set that aside as well. Let's move along to this hose right here. Squeeze that clamp, we'll slide this down. Give that hose a little wiggle. You want to be very careful not to break this sensor. Just going to see if I can pop it down off of there. Sometimes these can be difficult to get off. Now we can move along to removing our air inlet tube. It comes all the way across from here to there. To do that, I'm going to use an 8mm. I'll loosen up this clamp. Come over to this side. We'll loosen up this clamp as well. This clamp's messed up. Now that it's nice and loose, let's go ahead and grab onto it. We're going to give it a little wiggle. Start removing it from the throttle body here. Now if you feel like you need a little bit more room, you can just go ahead and pull this thing right out of the way. To do that, I would come right over here, squeeze on this, and that's what we'll do. There's a little clamp. Try to grab it from this side. Pull that off of there. Now we can grab onto this. We'll set this aside. Now we can move along to removing all 4 of our 8mm bolts that hold the throttle body to the intake. Go ahead and grab onto that throttle body. We'll just gently pull this away. And that exposes this bolt right under here. Now on the other side of the engine, we're going to look along the back side of the intake here. You're going to find another hose that leads onto it with a clamp. Go ahead and squeeze the clamp, slide it out of the way, and then remove the hose from the back of the intake. See if I can get this under here. Inspect that hose. Set it aside. Once the hose is off, let's continue on to removing this bolt right here using a 12mm. Now that we have this bolt out of here, let's use a 10mm socket to remove this bolt right there and then the bracket. Set this aside. Now down along the front side of the manifold here, you're going to find 5 10mm mounting bolts. One here, one up in there, in the center, and then the same on the other side. Let's start removing them all. All right, now that we have all those bolts out, we can go ahead and grab onto this, and we're going to lift it up and out of here. Set this aside. Now the next thing that I always like to do is just take some nice clean rags, and what we want to do is just slide them into the ports right here, essentially because we want to clean off any of the dirt and debris in this area, and we want to make sure that it doesn't fall into the engine. Try to take up some of that space. You don't need to force it all the way down into the engine because, of course, we are going to have to make sure that we remove them in the end. Now let's take a nice flat blade razor blade, and we're just going to go ahead and try to scrape off any of the existing gasket or anything the like that might be in the area where the gasket's going to be. You can see that there's a whole bunch of crud that's all over this. We want to make sure that it's clean and free of any debris, and also all up along the top area here, which is a little hard to see. A lot of times you're going to find some contaminants or some type of debris up on there, and we want to make sure that it doesn't fall down and get into the engine or on the gasket. So just go ahead and scrape it down, we'll blow it off, and then we'll go ahead and remove our rags. Now I'm just going to gently spray some air. Just try to remove any of the debris in the localized area. Now we're ready to start removing our rags. You definitely do not want to forget to remove any of these. Just double check to make sure no debris came out and it's sitting where the gasket's going to be. And now we can move over to our intake. Now that we have that cleaned, let's move along to the back side of the throttle body right here. This is super important to clean as well because you don't want any dirty or unmetered air making its way inside this area. Let's just go ahead and use that flat blade again. We'll clean off any of the corrosion or debris that might be in this area. We'll wipe it down, and then we can continue on. Now for the intake itself, I always like to replace the gaskets. I don't want to say that. Now for the intake itself, we can start removing the gaskets by grabbing onto the tab that you can find. Just go ahead and start pulling this right out of here. Now the next thing you want to do is pay attention inside these groove areas here and just make sure there isn't any debris or gunk or anything the like. If you wanted to, you can go ahead and try to spray it down. Just be careful not to get anything inside these tubes here because this is the air intake and it's going to draw air into the engine through here. Now we can start doing this top gasket here. You also have some little tabs. You remember those from when we removed the original. Let's just go ahead and get everything lined up. Once everything feels as though it's lined up, we can start pressing it in. There we are. Make our way down the line. Now before we go ahead and put this onto the vehicle, you just want to double check everything. Make sure your gasket's sitting in where it needs to be. Assuming this one looks good, double check the other one real quick, and then we can start getting ready to put this on the vehicle. Once you have that gasket out of there and it's clean, let's continue on to this end right here. Now this gasket right there can be a little bit difficult to take out, but if you just go ahead and grab onto this, you can pull this out and then remove the gasket. You just want to pay attention to how this is angled so when you put it back in, it's in the exact same position. Let's go ahead and grab onto this. We'll give it a little wiggle. We can pull it right out of there. Sometimes the gasket comes with it. You can remove that. We'll set this aside. Let's take our rag. We're just going to go ahead and wipe down this area in here, especially along the area where the gasket's going to ride. Super important. Once that's clean, let's move along to this area here. You don't necessarily need to use any parts cleaner or anything like that on this. We just essentially want to wipe it down and remove any debris that might be on it. All right, now it's time to put in our brand new gasket. Let's start with this one here. You're going to notice it has a little tab where my index finger is. You also have a slot on the intake where it needs to line up with. Go ahead and slide that right into position. Now we can start putting this piece in right here. If you were to look at the side of it, you're going to be able to find that there's a little tab that you can feel. If you were to feel inside of here, you can also feel where that tab needs to line up with. Let's go ahead and take this. We'll start inserting it. If it doesn't feel like it wants to line up, just try twisting it until it does. Once it's lined up, go ahead and press it right in there so it's nice and flush. Now we can go ahead and put our intake in here. Let's carefully slide it down and underneath the fuel rail here. Want to be very careful not to knock any of your gaskets off. Bring this down and get it into position here. There we are. Now the next thing we're going to do is start putting in all of our mounting bolts that come across here. Once they're all started, we'll start snugging them up and torquing them, but it needs to be done in a specific sequence, so let's go ahead and do it step by step. To start them in, you can start with pretty much any one you want. Now, once you have them all started, let's go ahead and bottom them out. And this is where the specific order comes in. So we'll start in the center. The next thing we're going to do is come up to this one up here. This one right over here. On the far corner on the driver's side. And then the same on the passenger side. Now that we have them all bottomed out, let's go ahead and torque these in the same exact order as we just went ahead and snugged them. We'll start in the center. When we torque these, we're going to torque them to 20 foot-pounds. And now we'll just come right back to the center for good measure. Perfect. Now at this point, we're ready to start putting this bracket back on here. Just take it, slide it right in underneath this area here. There we are. Now we can put our bottom bolt in. Make sure that hole is still lined up. That looks good. Just double check to make sure that your hole's lined up for the bolt there. Let's go ahead and snug this now. Once you have that one tight, let's go ahead and put in this bolt as well. Just gonna get this lined up. Snug this as well. Make sure that's nice and tight. Now we can reconnect this hose right here. Just go ahead and grab onto that clamp. We'll get it slid down into position on the hose. Slide the hose onto the PCV valve right there. Push it down as far as it can go. Try to put your clamp back exactly where you removed it from. Make sure that's nice and secure. Make sure this is into its mounting point right here as well. Now we can do this hose that comes along the back side of the intake here. Slide that on as far as it can go. then just go ahead and put the clamp into position. Come on, pliers. Make sure that's secure as well. Now let's make our way over to the driver's side of the intake. We'll put in this bracket bolt as well. Yeah, right, I'm thinking this, there we go. Now let's go ahead and start lining up our throttle body with its mounting holes here. We'll start in all 4 of our mounting bolts. Once they're put in, we'll go ahead and bottom them out and then torque these to 7 foot-pounds. Let's go ahead and plug this in. Listen for a click. Give it a tug. Make sure it's secure. Get the hose on there. Slide it all the way up as far as it can go. Put our clamp into position. Now we can start putting our air inlet tube on here. Let's start with this right here. Just go ahead and press it right in there. We'll clamp this later. Now at this point, we're going to start sliding the rest of this into position. Just get it down in behind here. There we are. We'll get this lined up as well. Start putting it onto the throttle body. Now we can do this other hose. Now sometimes this can be a tight fit, so you're going to have to do a little bit of struggling, but overall you should be able to do it. Try to get that bottom part on there. Now we'll just slide this right on. You should see where it wants to fit on. It has kind of like a little dimple here and one over there. It kind of fits around this area. Now we'll just make sure that the clamp is in position. Okay, just double check, feeling all the way around this hose. You want to make sure that it's secure all the way around here and over on the throttle body. This is super important. If you have any dirty or unmetered air coming into the engine, you're going to have a check engine light and a running condition. Make sure that's on there. All right, let's tighten the clamps. Make sure everything's nice and secure. Let's go ahead and put on this clamp. Now we've got this little vent hose right here. Let's just put this up and over and latch it in. All right, so now it's going to be time to put our engine cover on. But before we do that, just take a quick look. Double check that you connected all of your hoses that you might have disconnected and any electrical wiring along the way. This looks great, so while we start putting this on here, we're going to look for these tabs that come up along the cover. Those tabs need to line up with their corresponding holes that are on the intake right here. Let's go ahead and line them up. We'll press this down, latch it in, and then put in both of our mounting bolts. One here, one right there. Make sure it's secure. Lastly, it's time to put in our dipstick right here. Go ahead and slide it right in there. Make sure it's all the way down so no moisture can make its way into the dipstick tube. Okay friends, we got the car all put together. What's left to do now? Now you're going to want to go ahead and start up the vehicle, let it run for a minute. You want to make sure that you don't have a running condition, such as maybe a misfire of some sort, and also make sure you don't have a check engine light. Other than that, take it for a road test. Thanks.